I'm Allie Jackson Jolly. I'm here with legal expert Jon-Jorge Aras, who is a partner with Scarency Hollenbeck. Jon-Jorge, welcome, and thanks for being back here with us again.
Thank you so much for having me again. Looking forward to our discussion today.
Yeah, so just last week, you were walking us through the circuit court, the Illinois Circuit Court decision around whether Trump could be on the ballot or not. We were expecting that to go up to the Supreme Court, but before that could happen, the U.S. Supreme Court earlier today ruled on the Colorado case, which was deciding if candidate Trump could stay on the Colorado ballot or not. Unanimously, the justices decided to overturn the Colorado case that was going to keep candidate Trump off of the ballot and ruled that he, in fact, could be on the ballot. So, first of all, would you just let us know what you think we should know about this? And was it a surprise that the justices were unanimous in their decision?
Certainly. So just for a bit of primer, this case in front of the Supreme Court dealing with Colorado had to do with 6 voters that were challenging Trump's eligibility to be on the ballot on the basis that he engaged in an alleged insurrection. That was the basis of this case that ended up going through the Colorado Supreme Court, and that Supreme Court found that former President Donald Trump could be removed from the ballot on the basis of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which Section 3 of the 14th Amendment relates to U.S. officials that can hold positions within the government, and what applies in this instance, having engaged in an insurrection would potentially disqualify someone from that position. So that's the backdrop. This case gets brought up to the Supreme Court, arguments were held, and the justices today came down with a decision really just in time for Super Tuesday, which is tomorrow, which is a day when most states' primary elections are open for casting in the general election who is going to garner the amount of votes to be the candidate for the presidential election. So the timing of this was really important, and it had to come down quickly from the Supreme Court. And the result that we have today is a unanimous decision. 9 of the justices agreed that the Colorado case had to be overturned, that the decision in the Colorado Supreme Court that former President Donald Trump could be taken off the ballot was unconstitutional. And their reasoning was quite interesting. It really came down to 2 items. One of them is more legal and the other one is more practical, but they are tied into each other. And really, as simply as it can be put, the justices found that the states in the United States of America, do not have the authority to remove an individual from a potential candidacy for the U.S. presidency. States, under the 14th Amendment, can regulate themselves and their own elections when it comes to state officials, when it comes to the state Senate or the state House of Representatives, but that the 14th Amendment did not provide the states with the authority to do what ended up happening, which is removing Trump. So that's one part. That's the legal part of it. And then there were also many practical considerations, which really boiled down to if the Supreme Court and the Constitution allowed each individual state to go through a different process of who or who couldn't be on the presidential ballot, it could cause a serious issue for the American voters and the federal government, because then the states would maintain control on an individual basis of who could be president. And then it might come down to a few states deciding who's available as a candidate and who individuals could vote for. So there was a legal consideration, there was a practical consideration, and that's how we arrive at this 9-0 decision, a unanimous per curiam decision from the court.
Yeah, and so, there was a lot of talk about the court, the makeup of the court itself. Of course, There are 6 justices who are leaning more conservative, 3 who are leaning more left. And yet, in this, they all seem to come to the center together. Is that surprising? Or, is this indicative of the fact that the Supreme Court is, in fact, a little more apolitical than we talk about in the last few years?
I believe that this case presented a very unique issue that was focusing on disenfranchising the voters of the United States. And I think that's what allowed the Supreme Court to unify on this issue. This issue became clear, I believe, to the Supreme Court that by not having a strong and clear ruling on what was going to occur in this case, it could lead to problems with the general election. So the Supreme Court made a practical decision. It does have a legal foothold, and the legal foothold is simple and strong. The states simply don't have the power to enforce this type of authority over who can get elected or who can be a candidate for president. So I believe that the Supreme Court saw this as an opportunity to put out a clear message and really to sort out what's going to happen during 2024. We have a general election this year for the president of the United States, and this is one of the issues on the table, whether former President Trump could appear on the ballots. So that's in the clear now.
So just to be clear, all these other states, Illinois, Maine, maybe other states to come, that had been testing the boundaries of whether they could hold candidate Trump off of their ballot. Those cases are done. Definitively, we're not going to hear those again, at least in this 2024 presidential election. Is that correct?
I believe those cases are done for good. They are resolved. The court wrote the language in the opinion to be broad enough to encompass not just Colorado, but talked about the states as a group. The states don't have the power to enforce the 14th Amendment, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and bar individuals from being candidates for the presidential election. That power, the Supreme Court made clear, is left up to Congress. Congress can make that decision, not the states. So I believe this issue is now resolved. The Illinois case, the Maine case are done. We won't hear any more about challenges on the ballot to Trump on this basis, using the 14th Amendment. Now, could potential other challenges exist if he's found guilty in one of the ongoing indictments that he's facing? I think it remains to be seen. I do feel that this ruling was broad enough to cover a lot of what states can do relative to the Constitution and what they cannot do, but I wouldn't foreclose it completely. This did deal with the 14th Amendment and Section 3 of that amendment. So it's broad, but there may be other instances when that does come up.
Yeah, and so almost immediately after the justices ruled, candidate Trump said it was a big win for him. Is that true? Was this a win, slam dunk? Or was there, do you see anything in terms of what the justices did or didn't do that could have gone differently for candidate Trump?
I believe that candidate Trump described this as a big win for America. He went out on Truth Social Media and made it known. And I think in some respects, it is, given that there are so many Americans who have voted for Trump. And I think his characterization is pretty accurate for his campaign and for what he was trying to do to become elected president again. This was a hurdle that had to be crossed. So now this hurdle has been completed. He will appear on the ballots. The next hurdle is another case in front of the Supreme Court that deals with whether he has presidential immunity with respect to the indictment involving the alleged insurrection. So that's the next hurdle that he'll have to go over. And whether or not the Supreme Court will decide that before the election or in time for those cases to go forward remains to be seen. However, the court has made us all aware that they are cognizant of the election schedule. I don't think it's by any coincidence that today's decision came out on Monday in advance of Super Tuesday, when a lot of voters will go out and cast their ballot. So they're cognizant of what's going on. And I think that's a strong indicator that we will hear from the Supreme Court once the issue is briefed, once it's argued on immunity, that they have shown a willingness to act fairly quickly.
Yeah, and then we're almost out of time. So final question. Are there any, you spoke very clearly about what this says about states' inability to disqualify a presidential candidate. As an attorney, as a expert in this arena, do you foresee there being an entity out there, whether it's Congress or someone else, that may then, elevate this and say, okay, then we're going to address this at the federal level? I look into your crystal ball. I'm not, I won't hold you to it, but do you think this may be coming once we're through the state primary season?
I highly doubt it, because it would be viewed as such a political attack, even though there may be some cognizable legal argument or something that, they could put together maybe after the case goes forward with the alleged insurrection and the case brought by the Department of Justice against Donald Trump. Maybe then, potentially, if there's a guilty verdict or something along those lines, could Congress drum this up? But that gets really into the minutia of, the senators, the congressmen in the House of Representatives that are going to potentially make this decision. It's a very political statement for them to make. So looking into my crystal ball, I would say no. I think anything would be viewed as more of a political attack than having a substantive basis. And at some point, I think there will be, if there has not already been, a certain level of blowback against the repeated attempts to limit Trump's ability to run for president. I believe at some point, the American public wants to see his name on the ballot. If he wins the election, he wins. If he doesn't, he doesn't. I think there's a sentiment underlying the country right now that sort of these other actions, these other cases against him, are just ways to limit him from being on the ballot, when it really is a decision that should come down ultimately to the American people in deciding who to vote for on that day in November.
Yeah, all right. Well, this has been really helpful as always. Thank you for making us smarter about these complex issues. I guess it sounds like we're not going to keep this particular conversation going. So we're going to close the chapter, hopefully, and move on. But thanks again for being here with us. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. The good news is that we'll have a lot more to talk about as the year unfolds, because we do have a number of outstanding cases, particularly involving candidate Trump, that are circulating throughout 2024 and are going to shape the landscape for what it looks like in November.
Excellent. So let's keep those conversations going. Thanks
Great.
again.
Thank you so much for your time.